Yep.
All right,
Yep.
there we go.
I had the same problem this morning.
Hmm.
Okay. So the deal is, thank you, first of all, for everybody offering to jump in. The deal is that we have formed an official partnership with US Rowing, meaning we've actually signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with US Rowing to be what's called a community partner. And community partners pop up at regattas where it works. It might be a local community partner, it might be a national partner. In our case, we would be a national partner. And so basically they wanted us to take a information thought leadership role with the gender inclusiveness, gender inclusion that Allies with Oars champions. So, as you can imagine, US Rowing is challenged by providing really good information. And whereas Rachel and I see ourselves as a curator of really good information that already exists, for instance, um, we don't pretend to be thought leaders on the subject. We rather survey and ask and curate and design around things that already exist, and put our own flavor on it, of course. And that's what Allies with Oars is essentially. But U.S. Rowing wants us to have a presence at regattas. On the one end of the spectrum is like a booth that people are staffing all day long and talking about Allies with Oars and this issue. On the other end of the spectrum is more passive information, signage, stickers, packets, that kind of thing. So we have agreed, and Rachel and I have talked about working Allies with Oars in as a community partner for two regattas this year that are U.S. rowing sanctioned regattas, and that would be Masters Nationals and Head of the Charles. And by that, I mean in a very significant present way. The idea is that some of these materials may end up becoming something that gets put into a Coach and Cox packet for any regatta, or a deliverable like a sign, a yard sign that gets produced for a regatta. For our sanity, we're keeping it to just these two regattas that we're going to focus on, and they also have the biggest um, attendance, in our opinion. Does that encapsulate it, Rachel?
Yeah, yeah, and I would say, in addition to curating content, or curating ideas around inclusion, you know, you all have been a part of conversations that we've been having around this topic, and so it's very clear to me, like as someone who's, it's very clear to me that there are people who are part of our community within Allies who either have a very personal connection to this issue, they're part of the community, they have trans or non-binary kids, or other family members, they are trans or non-binary, and they speak about the issues in a really different way than I do. And I am really honest, and I'll let you know, I will never be able to speak that way about this issue because I don't come at it from exactly the same place. And I'm always working on becoming more educated. And so, what I'm hoping out of this working group is that we can use your brains. We need more brain power to be talking about the issues. I would love to hear your opinions about kind of what are you seeing from US rowing? How are clubs that you know handling LGBTQIA plus issues and inclusion? And when we start talking about what sorts of materials or deliverables we can offer to US rowing, I'm hoping that you will help us in the creation of some of the language that we use. And then Tara and I will move from there into creating the actual deliverable, whatever that thing is. So, and then we're looking at RowFest, which is obviously a US rowing owned event. And they would like to have Deliverables available. I mean, in theory, this is not going to happen this year, but in theory, I think US Rowing would like to have those things at all of their owned events and then make things available to US, well, to all US Rowing member clubs. And that might be made available via download from their website. Um,
Mhm.
so I think where the conversation starts, Tara, you and I had talked about, and because the issue is so broad and not, and also what we could create is so broad, Tara, you and I want to kind of see if we can hone in on what we think are some good ideas about what can we offer people, right? Like what will people interact with, that's quick, that's easy, that's going to get a conversation started and that will help answer, provide questions and provide answers. Um,
Yes. So thinking about regattas that you've been to where there might have been like an issue or something that was other than a sales pitch, or even taking that as an example, um, what are some things that would catch your eye, at a row fest? We don't have any problem being confrontational. We don't have any problem being funny. We don't have any problem being informational. We can do all of those things. Do you guys
and
have any initial? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
and to tack onto that, we don't want it to be performative, which I feel like a lot of people feel is happening with US rowing. I'm not sure I 100% agree with that, but a lot of people feel like I've gone to this event, even just this year, this US rowing event, and they've got a lot of stickers, they have a lot of pins, but I'm hearing people say, I think it's just kind of like a performance, especially based on what US rowing's current, what they've done with their competition categories. So how do we move beyond stickers and buttons to a larger conversation?
Well, my first thought is, going back to, I can't think, Tara, you had said something about like, what can US rowing do differently in terms of like what they're doing now and what we want them to see. And I think putting them, empowering them and putting them in a position where they feel enabled and empowered to have the uncomfortable conversations, because truly that's what I think is happening is that they see, like, in part of why it probably feels performative is that they either are avoiding, like actively avoiding, or they just don't know how to have the uncomfortable conversations of like, hey, you just, excluded a large number of people from participating in a way that they want to, right? Like they love this sport. They want to continue to do this sport in a body that they feel um like belongs to them in a way, like if that makes sense. And by avoiding that conversation, like you're just kind of saying the quiet part out loud. But it's an uncomfortable conversation. How do they do that? And so I think that's where we can kind of bridge that gap is help them to have that conversation in a productive way and acknowledge like, yeah, it's gonna feel uncomfortable. Like you're gonna learn things about yourself and maybe about groups or US rowing that maybe you didn't want to know. But by acknowledging it, you can then address it and move forward, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think there's an education piece too. I mean, having healthy conversations around this and how that works. Anyway, Winnie,
Yeah.
you unmuted yourself.
Oh, I don't really have any initial thoughts for like very specific deliverables, but my concern was similarly along kind of the performative aspect, and that especially when we're talking about a, having a presence, that I think kind of like along the way that Logan was thinking as well is just that I think having the presence more on the back end and making it more clear that people are welcome and finding ways to do that as opposed to just kind of having like more of the kind of, I don't know, the the stickers, the conversations with rowers in the community and everything will only go so far if US rowing is only seen to be backing it by putting their name on it and by not actually doing anything further.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was my initial like gut thought concern, something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I agree with you. And I think that US rowing is in a really sticky spot. Do I think that they should have a like a town hall meeting? Yes, that's something that we can bring to them. I think, they're not going to change their rules anytime soon. And so what we're trying to figure out is like, how do we basically handle the current situation, which will probably sustain at least through the next Olympic cycle. And I think Tara and I had this feeling like if we don't get involved as allies with oars, then maybe nothing is going to happen.
Right.
um, so yeah, I think that's where we are. How do we push the conversation? How do we engage US rowing to have the conversation? Now I'm kind of just spitballing, but I'm like, could this be literally on site at a regatta, invite people into the tent, say to a 10:30 a.m. on a Saturday, whatever. I'm just making up, come on in and
Yeah.
have a
Well,
chat.
one of the things I was thinking about as we were talking was, there's power to the people, right? If we figure out a way to support, hold conversations that happen within clubs and within boathouses, that will rise up to US rowing, right? And at the end of the day, what we want is for someone like Talon or Willow to walk into any boathouse anywhere in the world and feel welcomed, right? That doesn't happen from US rowing.
Mhm.
That happens from Logan being the board president at Kitsap or Winnie being involved in their club. So I wonder if we shouldn't worry about US rowing and that
Mhm.
they've basically handed the ball to us,
Mhm.
but we keep passing the ball down or laterally
Yeah.
to clubs. And don't worry about them, because if people get fired up enough and have had a lot of healthy, good conversations, and I'm just thinking of this now, I would feel like more people would rise up as a group, and that will have more power over US rowing than us having a contentious um something, right?
I think that actually ties in with something that Tara and I were talking about already in the past week, which is, creating these stepping off points for people to have conversations. So this loops back around. I agree with you, Tara. We can't influence what US rowing is going to do. We can't make them have a town hall meeting. We can suggest, right? But how do we create a virtual town hall? How do we get people talking? And so some of that could be, I don't want to say as simple as, because there's going to have to be some thought behind it, but creating social media content that is provocative, that asks questions and gets people talking. I think a stepping stone for me that I find is a hurdle is, how do we get people talking about this who might not think that they need to, right? Club leaders who are like, but it doesn't matter. We don't have any trans athletes. It's whatever, right? How do we make this really something that gets into the minds of club leaders?
Well, I know that, let me just jump in for a second. I know that when I used to teach inclusion in terms of adaptive rowing, I did a slide one time that said, you're probably more inclusive than you think you are. And it was all about like, here are ways to check yourself to see how inclusive you are. Like, does the door of your boathouse have a welcome sign with a contact phone number on it? Does, like, the simple stuff like that? Like, is it, really welcoming? And one of the things related to what Rachel's saying is, I don't know if you've seen these like family conversation cards, like these decks of family conversation cards or couples conversations cards.
I just did one of those a couple weekends ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're great. And they ask questions like, what's the most important item to you in the entire house? Or, so you get to see this like deeper conversation with your partner. So we had played around with the idea of like, inclusion trading cards. They actually make their way into individual tents at regattas and or are hung as signs in tents at regattas that are just provocative conversations. Like the fact that they ignore it is its own issue, right? Like don't ignore this sign, that kind of thing. Anyway, we'll stop talking because Rachel and I talk about this all the time.
Um,
Um,
I have, I guess, one question and then probably other questions that come from it, which is, would we be able to see the MOU that you guys signed with US Rowing just to kind of like see the nature? I'm better, I have an easier time processing with writing. Um, and
Sure.
then also, I'm curious as to what, like, obvious, it's like you said, Rachel, I know that they're in a sticky situation and I know that that's obvious, but I would like to know kind of what the limitations and what the bounds of it are. And so I was wondering if there's any resource on like where they are legally bound to not say things versus what they are permitted to do and kind of where we can toe that line. Because I agree that of course there's, like we need all teams, all people to be on board and we want to work up. But if we're working on the way up, it only goes so far. And then also, if we're putting US Rowing's name on something, we want to make sure that it does represent something that they can stand behind. And
Mhm.
then it kind of becomes, I guess, there's this kind of the gap between where we are and where they are. And I want to make sure that we can actually bridge that gap.
mhm.
And I feel like having kind of the understanding where the limitations that they have are can give us a better idea of like how we can approach and what we can do. But I don't know if that's information that is out there, or
That's
if
a
that's
really
something
good,
that they could give us.
yeah, that's a really good point. And Tara, I feel like I should know the answer to this, but is US Rowing actually expecting us to include US Rowing logos on these materials? No, these are Steady State Network Allies with Oars materials. So
Yeah,
we
so it's like when they went to youth nationals in Florida and everyone protested it and Youth Nationals was still in Florida. They went out of their way to get like the Trevor Project there and they went out of their way to have these local community partners who are like wildlife conservation or like river conservation, like community, those are community partners. And they can say and do whatever they want. I don't know that the MOU says anything about censorship or what we can and can't say. I would guess and my understanding is we are not speaking for US Rowing. They have invited us to be in this official capacity as a community partner, understanding that we have flexibility and freedom to say what we need to
Yeah.
say about the issue. I'm sure that might come when the rubber meets the road, that might come to be an issue if we get but Rachel and I, by virtue of being in this relationship, we're not going to be anti-US rowing. We're also not going to be party to omission, ignorance, silence, all of those things. So I think they don't have a voice around this issue and they have chosen us to do it.
And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of what I was thinking is that I assume, so like ignoring the whole like whether they have their name on anything or not, I assume that there will be a press release or something that says like
That's what we're
US
hoping
Rowing
for.
community, yeah, having like community partner, and that there is going to be that kind of like public, I guess that kind of like public relationship, whether there is that kind of like clear point A to point B kind of representation or not.
That's a
Um,
that's an outstanding question, whether they are
okay.
actually going to publicly announce that we, as one of many community partners, whether that list is going to be officially announced. And we all know how bad US Rowing is at making announcements and rolling out marketing and press releases and things like that. They're very disjointed. But that's something I'm following up on this week. And I think, Rachel, you were going to ask about another aspect of it. You were going to ask about deliverables, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
we're still parsing out some of the nuances of this, but I think um, we just wanted to get together the working group initially and just say, here's where we're at. But the timeline is pretty fast, and so we are going to have to turn around something pretty fast in order to allow them a time to print something um, or whatever, like whatever it is. Um, posters, banners, yard signs, whatever it might be. So we wanted to at least start chatting with you guys about it.
So I will say that the MOU is pretty simplistic. It is not a complex, it's not super detailed. Basically, we've outlined some shared goals, and if I can actually go through it pretty quickly here. And the shared goals are supporting trans and non-binary athletes, specifically in the broader LGBTQ plus community, providing materials and resources to athletes and allies, and exploring opportunities to engage more meaningfully on a year-round basis. So again, having the conversation, sustaining the conversation in a few different ways. Potential areas of collaboration include thought leadership, creating an open channel to share questions, ideas, potential speakers, and emerging opportunities for collaboration. This is kind of open here, and we will continue to have our conversation with US Rowing and see how this develops. They're looking for things like that are guides and resources to develop and amplify guidance around this issue for member organizations, allies and athletes, potentially referees. We see that this could be a thing that referees need to be kind of brought up to speed on if there are any potential disagreements about people participating in specific events. And knowing that we need to rely on subject matter experts, which Tara and I are not. We don't purport to be. We are allies, and we are, like Tara said, curators. But just like on the allies website, we've curated some resources, and we're looking to continue to do that, and probably like filter through those resources to create a thing that we provide, or things that we provide through US Rowing. We talked about regatta presence at US Rowing owned events. Realistically, we can't be everywhere all the time, so it'll be a couple of events, and then we can talk with allies who may be at local events that want to provide a presence. So that's pretty much the gist of it. It actually doesn't go into any detail about language, where the lines are. I find maybe we'll come up against that as we start to provide them some initial ideas and concepts. They want us to be honest, they want us to be direct. It's interesting, US Rowing actually put together a resource is a stretch, but they put together a document a couple years ago that's just simply called LGBTQ plus inclusion recommendations. So it's not that they haven't thought about this, they just haven't really done anything with it. So I'll send this to you all to look at, and then say, like, okay, well, if this is what US Rowing was recommending a couple years ago, how do we take this and run with it and make it an active living document and living conversation?
I see. So I think so. Just a couple thoughts on what we're all kind of everything that was just discussed. So I think there's a bunch of different directions that we could go. And personally, like kind of taking a step back and thinking, how would I look at this as like, almost like a business reorg, if you will. You know, going back to like Terry, how you had said we kind of want to focus on like club level, like, lateral passes are down. I think it's still really important. I want to push back on you a little bit. And I think it's really important that we also go upward with this, because if we talk about performative, like, if we get into this relationship with US Rowing, whether they put their name on it or not, to me, if I were on the outside looking in, if we don't engage US Rowing in any way, like US Rowing, like the upper echelons,
Yeah.
that's textbook performative. And
Right.
so like figuring out a way that we can engage them, even if it's just a structured, town hall at nationals or the Charles or whatever, like the way I'm thinking of it is, we can not necessarily steer people toward the open gender categories, but just acknowledge that, like, hey, at least for the next few years, like this is something we have to deal with. And so this is the opportunity. how can we make the best of it? And, one thing we could do, I was talking to Rachel Egner the other day about like she wants to do a parents of trans vote, right?
Mhm.
Like, and I think that's a really cool idea. That's a way that
Yeah.
we can still
Yeah.
stay in these guardrails that US rowing sets, but
Right.
also acknowledge, our trans inclusion, right?
And that's how we got Rachel Egner involved, was because we thought there are more parents of trans kids in rowing right now than there are trans kids.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And so like that's a really important voice to hear. Like I remember talking to Summer and Kashi at Crew Classic, and it was one of the best conversations I've had, but also it was just really enlightening to be like, wow, there's, this other side of like, yeah, Summer is, getting this really shitty deal with all of it, but then Kashi's sitting there watching it all happen and just wants the best for Summer. And
Mhm.
like it just really like reinvigorated me to be like, I wanted to go like Papa Bear mode with Summer and be like, who's
Totally.
who's hurting Summer, right? Like I'm gonna
Yeah.
fight them. And so, like, I think it's doing stuff like that with US rowing is going to be really important. And then, as far as like, the lateral moves or lateral passes and like downward throughout the clubs, like, just really reinforcing for them, like, hey, inclusion is really, really important. Rachel, like you said, like, or it was Rachel, one of you two, where, you said you're probably more inclusive than you realize. Like, that happened with my own club where we started talking about inclusion and, things like that. It was like when I first started rowing with allies, a lot of them asked, they're like, "Are we not inclusive?" I'm like, "No, you are. Like this club is very inclusive. We just now have to say it out loud, right? Like because other people don't know that we are. We know that we are. They
Yeah.
don't. And so now, like, it's important just to say it."
Yeah, like
Yeah.
even my own club, so at Capital, so I'm the communications director this year. I'm starting to think about some things related to a regatta, a sprint regatta that we host. And I was like, I don't even know if we're offering open gender. I don't know where things stand with the events that my club is going to offer at this event, at this regatta. So I went to Regatta Central. I looked at the event list and I was like, oh, awesome. Like we're going to be super inclusive. We're going to offer open gender events and the whole thing, right? But that's not being communicated. And that's partly on me. Like I'm new to this role. And now that I know, I need to get it out there into the universe. And so
Yeah. I wonder, I really like what I like what Logan keeps saying in a way of saying things out loud. Like that as a theme of like say it loud, say it proud. I mean, those that goes back to the AIDS epidemic era of um Audre Lorde's famous quote um about silence. God, I don't know
yeah.
why. I'm not know why I'm not thinking of it, but I had it on a T-shirt when I marched on Washington in 1993 against for gay rights. Um, there is some existing language visuals that come from that era that are still very, very, very relevant today. Um, silence being the enemy, silence being complicit, those kinds of things. So it's like speak your inclusion, speak your pride, speak your, that kind of thing, saying it out loud. But I think this concept of self-reflection, where clubs may already be thinking, and US rowing probably is already thinking, we're not doing enough, right? We're not doing enough, we're not doing enough, we're not doing enough. And now the pressure from the world rowing level is really silencing them even more, because they stand to lose funding, they stand to lose status, they stand to lose all these things. With San Diego Crew Classic, they operate very separately, but they are a U.S. rowing sanctioned regatta. And Bobby, who runs that regatta, was concerned about them losing their status by not complying with the new rule, right? Um, but they worked around it, and a lot of people don't know that they can work around it. That there's these things called the rules of rowing per sanctioned regattas that's left to the local organizing committee, and you can decide what that means for you. Then they're not publicly and loudly saying that. It's very hush hush and it's very under the table, but you know, bringing to light who is offering open gender events, how it happens, all just like speaking it out loud. I really like where that's going. I like where that concept is. So I don't know, maybe we think of two or three different things that need to be said out loud in that way, and we kind of run with that, you know.
I mean, I think that loophole should be number one or number two priority. Like, because I know
Mhm.
there's a lot of regattas, and this depends on what the fine print of our relationship with U.S. rowing says. Like, if acknowledging that loophole is, whatever you want to call it, and like trickling it down to other clubs, like if that's gonna cause issues with this, relationship, I mean, maybe it's good to challenge it a bit, or, maybe that's the guardrail that they set, right? And so I think, hearing that that's something that crew class was able to do, because I truly thought that, every regatta that I saw where they would come out and say that, race in the gender that you, or race in the category you want to race in, like I thought they were just, sticking it to the man. Like I thought they were like, screw US rowing, we're going to do what we want. I didn't realize that there was actually like a potentially legitimate, way around that. And so I think making some literature about that, I think would be really cool and a really great
Yeah.
thing for us to do.
I agree. And I think also in terms of that, and then just kind of expanding it more broadly, like, and it does kind of go back to kind of what they're allowed to say, where the guardrails are going to be. But even if there's something like, it's like, oh, well, we can't have it in writing, then a resource of like, here, here is the code switching to look for. Here are the green flags to look for. Here's who to contact if you're not sure. Just kind of like a resource for it's like how to tell what to do, how to tell, how to find out in a way that you can do it before putting like marginalized and vulnerable people in a really uncomfortable situation, and it's kind of where to look, who to ask, just a general resource for how to
Mm,
approach it, I think would be
hmm.
also very helpful.
Yeah, I love that green flags. Green flags as a theme for sure, because that then people don't feel like they're just constantly screwing up and they're constantly deficient. You know, I like that a lot.
There are also a few different um like a few different ways to have the conversation, right? So we can talk about inclusion generally in the boathouse, inclusion in your club. There's also, I mean, more granular, which is like literally what do we do with certain people in lineups, right? Like I've had to have that conversation. How do we boat this particular athlete? Can they race in X, Y, or Z? But then there's this bigger conversation we're having about regattas. I like, Winnie, what you're saying, which is like, what if we just don't even know where to go to have this conversation, right? And that's why I like the conversations we've been having within the WhatsApp group, where I can see, or just been able to say like, hey, if you have questions, go talk to Jenny Treas at US Rowing, right? Like Tara and I might not have the answers, but maybe it's thinking about some of the things that we've already been talking about as a group, like pulling that stuff out and like saying, here, everybody, here are things that we know that you can do. Begin. Um,
Yeah,
so
also along the lines of that, like best practices.
yeah,
Things that allies have honed over the last few years, um, in terms of what can work.
yeah. So Logan, the thing that we've heard from, that I first heard from Tom Rooks, who's now like the director of sport, I think, at US Rowing, and a couple of other folks have said there, um, but again have not kind of like publicized out to the membership, which is, there are rules. Certain rules can kind of are somewhat malleable. Some rules are a bigger deal than others. This is one of those that I think is a really big deal. But one thing Tom said to me was like, hey, there's a rule that like your umpire flag is supposed to be red and it's supposed to be, whatever, 12 inches by 24 inches. And some people are like, you know what? I don't have that flag today. And so they'll use a different flag. If I, as a coxswain, was like, this is bullshit, I need that flag, I can raise my hand and I can contest their equipment. They are not following that rule. Most people, though, be like, whatever, you know? So it's kind of like that, but a bigger deal. And that's kind of how clubs are handling it right now. Like they're saying, we know what the rule is. We're going to ignore it. We're going to run our regatta the way that we want to. And unless someone steps up and complains to US Rowing about XYZ trans athlete participating in this event, then we're just going to do it.
Mhm.
And so, right, how do we say that out loud? And will US Rowing, how would US Rowing feel about that if that we pass that message along? That's a really big question.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think they already acknowledge it in there because when they released their whatever the inclusion policy, whatever they called it, I remember reading a line in there that was like, it said, ultimately the only time in which a referee is allowed to take action on anything like that is if someone comes to them directly, right?
Hmm.
And so to me, that was kind of US Rowing's way of like acknowledging, hey, if no one says anything,
Mm-hmm.
it's fine. And so I think truly, and like, this kind of, forgive me, this kind of goes along the Riley Gaines situation, but like truly, how many people in which this particular rule would affect, how many of them truly are going to make it into a top three national Olympic type situation, right? Like let us row, let them row, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
truly, like the chances in which someone is going to go all the way to the top, while I would love to see that happen, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. And if it does, great. But then that forces a conversation, right? And so like that's kind of the quiet part, saying the quiet one of the quiet parts out loud is like the chances of someone actually winning all of this, it's not zero, but statistically it's not very high. Just like if we look at, a straight cis, white person, that they have the same chances, right? So I don't know. I'm kind of talking in circles, but I think y'all get it where like it's emphasizing that part of that language of the rule, I think is really important because truly I don't think a lot of people are going to say anything.
Yeah, I'm looking at the competition category, Logan, the document that they sent out that went live on January 1st. Right, and they've got language about dispute resolution. They've got
I think
uh
that's what it was.
yeah, confidentiality for purposes of determining whether a person is eligible to participate in the women's competition category and like some language around that about presumptions, rebutting, things like that. Um, but yeah, I think the athletes that this concerns are just like, I think that they're just, registering themselves as the gender they identify with, no matter what their birth certificate says. They're not going to give US rowing the upper hand here. Um,
It's our own version of don't ask, don't tell.
yeah, yeah. So, um, okay. All right. Well, I feel like we're boiling things down in a couple of like key things to focus on and a couple of key ways to share that information.
Yeah.
Um, again, we're not thinking about like we're going to be writing papers. This is like we need to make this really easily digestible. And the way that my brain has been working these days is like, how do we make this like clickable, content that someone's just going to be like swipe, swipe, swipe through. We've had some success with social media posts like that in the past when some big things have come up, a little slide deck of 6 slides or whatever, and people have really resonated with that. Like that's how they're getting their information about big issues like this. And so that's actually where I kind of want to focus first is like, what can we get out to the masses, and then figure out what sort of printed materials can be shared without anybody sitting at a table at a tent, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
so I guess one thing that I might ask is if either of you have any sort of LGBTQIA plus resources that you've used, that you point other people to, that you have found really like helpful or interesting or engaging, websites, social media accounts, things like that. Um, Policies. Like I actually would love to see some of that so we can start thinking about how other people are talking about this issue as well and how they're presenting information out to folks. Like I said, and I know you've seen it, we have some stuff on the Allies website, or page on our website, some resources there. And then I kind of just have a handful of things that I've just had sitting in a file for a while. So maybe I'll just email you all those as well, so that because we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. People are already talking about it and we've been talking about it. So maybe it's a matter of just like picking and choosing some things that we think are really interesting and then tying it to our particular community and the rowing world.
Yeah, yeah, I like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Was there anything else, Tara, that you had on the agenda?
No, I think this is a great start. I think we need to meet again pretty soon and bring in the other couple of people that want, but we can do a summary of this meeting and send them the recording of this as well so they can watch it. But like I said before, the timeline's pretty tight and we don't want to end up having a rushed process. So we need to just find out from US Rowing how much advance notice they need in order to get something done for Masters Nationals or Rowfest, and then work backwards from there. Okay.
All right. And just so to wrap up some things that key things I heard us talking about was something I really liked was this filter up, filter down. Logan, you said filter laterally, right? Like there are a couple
Yeah.
different ways a couple of different groups of people we're thinking about reaching and how important all that is. We want to talk about this loophole of this rule, right? How do we get that out and how do we explain that in a way that US Rowing supports? Um,
And
and
all
and
rules that have loopholes, not just that one.
yeah,
Just like
yeah,
where
yeah,
are the loopholes?
yeah, um, and supporting conversation at a lot of different levels. The other big thing, which I wasn't really considering before we came into this conversation, was like holding US Rowing's feet to the fire in terms of being actionable on this. Cause you're right. Like we could just hand them this stuff and they'll be like, hey, thanks. Right. But maybe we push them to have um um like definitely at like Head of the Charles. They always have like hour long sessions at tents at Head of the Charles. Or we could do um a web meeting, which they haven't had any in a really long time. They kind of go through fits and starts where they're like, oh, this thing's really important. And we're gonna have 16 meetings about it. But they haven't had a single one about this one. So I think you're right, Logan. We should really kind of push them on that. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, cool. So get to us if you have anything that you want to add, any big ideas. If you've got suggestions about any of this, we want to hear it. And let's see if we can have another meeting. We don't want to do it like too often. We know you've got lots of things happening, but we'll figure out a time that we can chat again, okay? All right.
Beautiful.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Well,
you.
Great. Have a good night.
yep,
Thanks. See ya.
later.